My parents kicked me out on my 16th birthday. Not because I'd done anything wrong, but because my sister Amanda was pregnant, and they needed my room for her baby. That was the moment I realized, once and for all, that I was nothing more than an afterthought to them. I turned 16 a week ago, but there wasn't much of a celebration, just a half-hearted, happy birthday, from my parents before they sat me down for a serious conversation. They told me Amanda, who was 7 months pregnant, needed more space. Since we only had 4 bedrooms, and the guest room was already reserved for Amanda's boyfriend, they decided my room would become the nursery. Their solution? I would move out and live with my aunt. At first, I didn't understand. I asked why they couldn't use the guest room for the baby, but they told me it was off-limits because Amanda's boyfriend would be staying there. They explained that I was mature enough to handle the change and promised to cover my expenses until I turned 18, as though that would make everything okay. The message was clear: I was no longer welcome in my own home. Amanda wasn't home for the conversation, and I suspect that was intentional. They probably didn't want her to witness what they were doing or feel guilty about it. While we'd never been particularly close due to our age gap, I'd always thought Amanda was at least kind enough not to condone something like this. If she truly agreed with this plan, it shattered the image I had of her as a person. When I went to my room to pack, I didn't cry or argue. I just felt numb. The truth is, I'd already accepted long ago that I wasn't a priority for my parents. They've always favored Amanda, and I'd learned to live with being treated like an afterthought. But this? This was beyond anything I'd imagined. They helped me pack, which, looking back, felt more like they were rushing me out the door than offering genuine help. When my bags were ready, they loaded everything into the car and drove me to my aunt's house. The car ride was surreal. My parents acted cheerful, chatting as if nothing unusual was happening. I didn't say a word, I just stared out of the window, trying to make sense of what was happening. When we arrived, my aunt greeted me warmly. She hugged me and helped me bring my things inside. My parents didn't stay long. They dropped my bags at the door, exchanged polite words with my aunt, and left. No hug, no "take care," not even a goodbye. Later that evening, I sat down with my aunt and told her everything. She listened intently, her expression shifting from shock to anger as I explained how my parents had decided to kick me out to make room for Amanda's baby. She was horrified. After a long pause, my aunt excused herself to make a phone call. I didn't think much of it until I heard her yelling in the next room. My aunt is usually calm and soft-spoken, so hearing her raise her voice was unsettling. When she returned, her face was red with anger. She told me she had just spoken to my father and learned something even more upsetting. Apparently, he had lied to her about the situation. He'd told her that I wanted to move out and live with her because I thought Amanda's baby deserved my room. According to him, I was completely on board with the idea and even excited about the change. My aunt had believed him because she'd always known me to be quiet and reserved. She thought maybe I was trying to escape an unhappy home life and that this was my way of doing it. Now that she knew the truth, she was furious. She apologized to me over and over, saying she never would have agreed to this arrangement if she'd known the real story. I reassured her that it wasn't her fault. This was entirely on my parents, they'd used her kindness to justify their selfishness. That night, I couldn't stop thinking about everything. The unfairness of it all overwhelmed me. I decided I needed to do something, anything, to make myself heard. So, I went online and shared my story. I wrote about how my parents had kicked me out on my birthday, about how they'd always favored Amanda, and about how this latest betrayal had finally broken me. Writing the post was an emotional experience. By the time I finished, I was crying. When I hit post, I immediately turned off my phone. I couldn't bear to see the reactions right away. I felt vulnerable, and part of me worried about the consequences of exposing my family's dysfunction to the world. The next morning, when I finally turned my phone back on, I was overwhelmed by the response. My post had gone viral, at least within our family. Relatives were commenting and messaging me, expressing their support. Some said they had no idea things were so bad for me. Others offered to help in any way they could. But the messages from my parents were a completely different story. My dad's texts were filled with anger. He accused me of being ungrateful and airing our private family matters for attention. He even said he wished I'd never been born. My mom's messages were just as cruel. The only one who didn't lash out was Amanda. She sent a short message saying she wanted to talk to me in person. I didn't know how to respond. On one hand, I wanted to believe she genuinely cared. On the other, I couldn't forget that she had benefited from my parents' favoritism her entire life. For the next few days, I stayed quiet. I didn't respond to my parents or Amanda. My aunt reassured me that I wasn't in the wrong and encouraged me to focus on myself. She even contacted a lawyer to discuss the possibility of transferring custody. Then, one day after school, my parents showed up. They were waiting for me outside, looking furious. My friends, who knew about the situation, stood by me protectively. My parents yelled my name, demanding I talk to them. Reluctantly, I walked over. They insisted I come home with them, but I refused. That's when they revealed their real reason for being there, my grandparents. My grandparents had found out about what my parents had done and were livid. They threatened to cut my parents out of their inheritance unless they reconciled with me. My dad admitted they couldn't afford to lose the inheritance, which was why they wanted me back. It wasn't about me, it was about money. Hearing this only solidified my decision. I told them I didn't care about their inheritance and walked away. After walking away from my parents outside the school, I headed straight to my aunt's house. My friends offered to come with me to make sure I was okay, but I told them I just needed some space. When I got home, I explained what had happened to my aunt. She was furious, not just with my parents but with the fact that they had the audacity to show up at my school and confront me. She told me that their behavior was unacceptable and that she'd be speaking with her lawyer again to ensure they couldn't pull something like this in the future. That evening, I decided to call my grandparents and tell them everything. They had already heard bits and pieces of the situation through my aunt, but I wanted to explain it from my perspective. I told them how I'd always felt like an afterthought, how my parents had kicked me out on my birthday, and how I didn't want to go back to living with them. My grandparents were heartbroken. They apologized profusely, saying they wished they had known sooner how badly I was being treated. They promised to support me in any way they could. During the call, they also confirmed something I had suspected after my parents' confrontation at school. My grandparents had indeed given my parents an ultimatum: either reconcile with me or lose their inheritance. My grandparents told me they were prepared to cut my parents off entirely if that's what it took to ensure I was treated fairly. Hearing this gave me a sense of validation I'd never felt before. For the first time, someone in my family was standing up for me in a meaningful way. The next few days were a whirlwind of emotions. My aunt spent hours on the phone with her lawyer, working on transferring custody. Meanwhile, I received an email from my dad. Unlike his previous texts, this email wasn't angry or hateful, it was just disappointing. In the email, he accused me of creating unnecessary drama by posting about the situation online. He said the post had caused problems for him at work because some of his coworkers had seen it. He also complained about being ostracized by other family members, saying it was unfair for him and my mom to face so much backlash. He never apologized for what he and my mom had done. Instead, he painted himself as the victim. I didn't respond to the email. I didn't see the point. It was clear that my parents weren't interested in taking accountability for their actions, they just wanted to salvage their reputation. Updates. Update 1. Thank you to everyone who commented on my original post. Your kind words and support mean so much to me. I wanted to address a few questions that many people had. First, a lot of you asked why I didn't leave my parents' house earlier, especially since my grandparents and aunt seemed willing to help. The truth is, I didn't fully realize how bad things were until they kicked me out. My parents weren't physically abusive, they were just indifferent. That kind of neglect is harder to recognize because it doesn't leave visible scars. For most of my life, I convinced myself that having food, clothes, and a roof over my head was enough. I didn't think it was important to feel loved or valued. I normalized their behavior because I didn't know any better. As for why I didn't reach out to my grandparents or aunt earlier, I didn't want to burden them. I was also scared of what might happen if they refused to help and my parents found out. My aunt explained that she never offered to take me in because she didn't want to insult my parents or overstep. She wasn't sure if I even wanted to live with her, so she stayed out of it. Looking back, I wish I had spoken up sooner. But I can't change the past, so I'm focusing on the future. Update 2, I have some good news. My parents have officially agreed to give up their parental rights. My aunt is now my legal guardian. The process took a bit of time, but it's finally done. I later found out why my parents agreed so easily. My grandparents gave them another ultimatum. They could either lose their entire inheritance or keep 50% of it if they signed away their parental rights and promised not to interfere in my life. Unsurprisingly, they chose the money. While I'm relieved to be free of them, I can't help but feel a little sad. Knowing how quickly they were willing to give me up is painful, even if it's what I wanted. My aunt has been amazing throughout all of this. She's gone out of her way to make me feel at home, and for the first time in years, I feel like I belong somewhere. I've also started seeing a therapist to help process everything. Update 3, life with my aunt has been wonderful. She's kind, supportive, and genuinely cares about me. I've started to focus on school and my hobbies again, and for the first time in a long time, I feel hopeful about the future. My sister Amanda and I have also started to rebuild our relationship. After my original post, she reached out to me, wanting to talk. At first, I wasn't sure if I wanted to see her, but I eventually agreed. When we met, she apologized for not standing up for me sooner. She admitted that she had always known our parents treated me unfairly but didn't know how to address it. She also told me that she had no idea our parents planned to kick me out. According to her, she never asked for my room or the guest room. In fact, she had been planning to move in with her boyfriend full-time after the baby was born. She said she felt terrible about what had happened and wanted to make things right. We talked for hours, and by the end of the conversation, I felt a sense of closure. While our relationship still has a long way to go, I'm willing to give her a chance. As for my parents, I haven't heard from them since the custody transfer was finalized. My grandparents told me they've been trying to repair their relationship with Amanda, but she's keeping her distance. I guess they're realizing too late how much damage they've done. Final thoughts. Looking back, I feel like I dodged a bullet. My parents' actions were cruel and selfish, but they've also led me to where I am now, a place where I feel safe, loved, and supported. I'm grateful to my aunt, my grandparents, and everyone who has stood by me through this ordeal. For the first time in my life, I feel free. Thank you for watching the video. Subscribe and turn on notifications to be the first to have radish and real stories with you. Have a great day.